Hey guys, I wanted to read you another chapter from my book. As of right now, I just completed chapter 14, so I'm very close to being halfway done. Very excited about that. I didn't have much time this week to do a video, so I thought it'd be a good opportunity to just read the second chapter from my book. If you didn't see the video where I read to you the first chapter, I'll give you just a quick overview of what happened. So basically they announced at the Kingdom Hall that the end of the world had finally come. Armageddon is here. Um, they were instructed to turn off all their cell phones. They're not really sure why, but that's what the governing body said, that Jehovah has instructed them. So they're not allowed to use their phones. Sister Cuse had a freak out because her son is not at the meeting because he was feeling sick that day. So she freaked out and collapsed and fainted. Alright, so I guess we could probably get started. I think that's probably enough information. The only other thing is that they decided to carry on with the Sunday meeting as normal, even though the end of the world just happened. So here we go, chapter 2. It was the strangest meeting John had ever attended. Brother DuPont did a commendable job of getting through his talk while being understandably distracted. The Watchtower study had mixed levels of attentiveness. Some were unusually enthralled and eager to raise their hands to answer, while others divided their time between staring at powered-down cell phones or at the elders. Others just looked shocked. The same 5 people ended up commenting on all the paragraphs. John had double duty today. Not only did he play the songs and adjust the volume, but he had to carry a mic to all those who raised their hand. Well, all those on his side of the hall. The other half of the congregation had Billy Martin as a mic handler. John laughed to himself while looking him over. His hair was spiky with frosted bleach blonde tips. That hairstyle was much too worldly for a brother trying to advance in the congregation, and he wasn't wearing his coat again. John gave a silent sigh. Billy had already been counseled by the brothers about not wearing his coat. It was as if he just didn't care. To think that Jared Cuse, a fine brother, was not here in God's protection because he was sick, yet Billy stood there pretending to be a fine brother. It was infuriating. He absently handed Sister Daniels the mic. Billy may have the whole congregation fooled, but not me. There was a time when Brother Martin seemed zealous. That is why he became one of John's go-to guys for carrying the mics. But pretty soon after, he began to fall away, attending less and less meetings. He could not be relied upon. Even when he did actually show up, his appearance was a mess. It looked bad when a brother of the responsibility was less formal than ideal. Now this new hairstyle? Not to mention, Billy was popular at school. He had more friends in the world than John could ever have inside the entire Jehovah's Witness organization. They had played together as small children, and now that he lived with the Martins, it was almost like they were family. But Billy's slow drift into the world had driven a wedge between them. John had to remind himself that only Jehovah can judge. Billy would get what was coming to him. He shuddered as he realized that maybe sooner rather than later. Billy is a jerk. Everything comes so easy for him. But do I really want him to die in Armageddon? Yes, a tiny voice spoke into Billy's microphone. Little Susie of 5 years old had just answered, but John hadn't been paying attention and missed the conductor's question. He felt a small tinge of guilt as he lifted the watchtower back up to follow along. Brother Lewis gave the concluding prayer, which sounded more like a confession. He stood there begging for Jehovah's forgiveness for a long time, so long that John felt very much like telling him to say amen and be done with it. Finally, he was done, and when John opened his eyes, he saw that the brother was visibly sweating. If this had been any other Sunday, he would have made a joke about the last prayer being more like a third talk, but today it would have been in poor taste. Many of the brothers and sisters remained seated after the meeting was over. They looked as if God was winding up a lightning bolt with their names on it. John thanked Jehovah silently for giving him the strength to get here with a clean conscience. It would seem that he was one among few. The ones who did not remain seated immediately got up and confronted the closest elder to their respective chairs. They spoke loud. John could easily hear their questions from the back. "Was that all the letter said? Did it say anything else? Will you read it again?" Brother Norris limped his way over to them and scoffed. Those gathered around Brother Christian turned their heads to the large brother. Sister Bennet was shooting him daggers. "Brother Norris, I hardly think this is a matter to take lightly," she said. "No?" He smiled wide. "Sister, you have been in the truth long enough to know that the brothers, along with the Bible, have always prepared us for every good work, and every trial we may have to face." His good old boy accent had a way of putting John at ease. "I don't see your point." Sister Bennet was not so easily charmed. Her posture remained rigid. "Well, after everything we have seen over the years, I would not jump to conclusions too quickly. After all, Jehovah tested our faith back in 1975, and when the end didn't come as promised, many lost their faith." Sister Bennet's eyes widened and her nostrils flared. "The faithful slave did not promise the end would come in 1975. Those claims were made by overzealous brothers who, it may not have been worded exactly like a promise, but you and I both know it was promised in the talks and publications. The generation that will not pass away was at an advanced age prior to 1975. Combined with the statements that 1975 was a significant biblical date. What's your point?" Brother Christian cut him off with that voice of his. He looked around at all those who had been listening and shook his head. "Well, I just think we should be patient and not be too surprised if this is the test of our faith, or at the very least a drill to prepare us for the actual events of Armageddon." Brother Christian relented to a slight nod. "Is this true, Brother Christian?" Sister Bennet looked like she wanted to shake the answer out of him. "The letter said nothing of this being a drill or simply a test of our faith. We should not presume anything other than what has been said. I will go get the letter and let you all read it, but—" he pushed through the crowd and retrieved the paper from his bag. "Still, it's a good idea to not be over-anxious, or to get our hopes too high in case the end does not come right away. Remember that we experience a passage of time much slower than Jehovah." Brother Norris nodded, and Sister Bennet snatched the letter from his hands. "Brothers, I'm ashamed of you. When Jehovah says his day is here, he means it. I suggest you pray that he does not take your words as a lack of faith." Brother Christian shrugged. "The Bible also says the world was made in a day. We should not presume to know the exact interpretation of God immediately, but trust he will enlighten us according to his own time frame." Sister Bennet sneered at that, but did not argue any further. The room was alive with squabbling and excited conversation when Billy walked up to John. He was returning the wireless microphone he had carried. He took it apart to retrieve the battery and placed it on its charger. "Thanks for your help today, Billy." When he heard nothing in response, he looked up. Billy was staring blankly off at the wall. "Are you all right?" He came to and cleared his throat. "Yeah, it's just this whole thing. Pretty wild, huh?" John could hardly disagree with that. He closed the sound booth up and locked it out of habit. "You can say that again. I wonder if Sister Cuse is okay." "Yeah, no, I mean the whole thing. Either Jehovah's Witnesses have finally lost their minds, or it's the end." His face went blank again. "Well, if it's really happening, then questioning their sanity is probably the last thing you'd want to be doing right now." He stood up. Yeah, well, there isn't much else to do, is there? If this is for real, we can't leave, Billy said with a sigh and looked at his black Oakley watch. Some of us believe more than others, but those of us with little faith have plenty to do. Billy shifted his footing. Really? Like what? John patted him on the shoulder with a smile. Pray. He left Billy there, feeling more than a little satisfied with the exchange. Brother Hollander looked over as if to say, I told you so, boy. He remained at his seat, not socializing with the others. John would go talk to him, but he decided to save the long-winded brother for last. He wanted to talk to Tara Smith first. He was quite drawn to her. It was true that she was not the most zealous sister in the congregation, but she was the prettiest. Ashley Cox was already there by her side when he walked up. Cox was always trying to encourage Tara to go out in service, a good Christian influence. John had first tried to date Ashley. She was the best choice spiritually, but she would not give John the time of day for some reason. Tara was different, though. He walked up and interrupted their conversation. I'm so glad you made it to the meeting today. That made Tara smile, while Ashley rolled her eyes. Oh, thank you, John. She briefly touched his arm. Her smile was as warm as ever, but it quickly faded in place of worry. We need to talk. John almost replied before realizing she was looking over his shoulder. About what? Billy replied. John should have known he was there. It had been a real contest for attention lately. Just come on. She led him by the hand out of the main room. John was left there standing awkwardly silent with Sister Cox. What was all that about? John said as he watched them go. Ashley sighed and crossed her arms. You don't know anything, do you? She said bitterly. About what? About anything. She turned and walked away, shaking her head. What do you know that I don't? A feeling sank into John's gut. There was something going on with Tara and Billy. Had they been going out? That must be it. Figures, John grumbled to himself. That would explain why Billy hadn't been home much lately. He had all the luck with girls, while John could never catch a break. It didn't make sense. I'm attractive enough. I have a good personality. I'm spiritual. What on earth does Billy have that I don't? He shook it off and tried to remain positive. None of that mattered anymore, anyway. The end was here. John found himself walking towards where Brother Hollander still sat. John stood there silently for a moment, thinking. Brother, will we have husbands and wives in the New World? What? He looked startled. Oh, John, I did not see you walk up. Now, what was that? Wives? Yeah, what does the society say about... Oh, yes, well... He wiped his sweaty brow with a handkerchief. It depends on the circumstances, I suppose. He blew his nose into the same cloth, and John grimaced. Those already married will remain so, if they survive through Armageddon. But those who have already died... Remember that marriage is a union only broken by death. So a couple once married before death will no longer be married in the new system. Yes, I knew all that, but what about those who survive single? Well, he cleared the phlegm in his throat. Maybe. The truth is, we just don't know for sure yet. We do know two things from what the Bible has told us about the New World. One, it will be very different from the imperfect, miserable system that we live in today. Two, life will be better, no matter what, because it will be perfect. Our lives will be exactly as Jehovah intended. Hollander smiled big, but the response did little to satisfy John. He nodded his head anyway. I guess we just have to trust in Jehovah that we will have everything we want. Exactly. The conversation at least made Brother Hollander feel good. "We will, son, we will." He patted John on the back. "I used to give wedding talks here at the hall. Did I ever tell you about that?" "No, I don't think so." John sat down beside him with a sigh. The end had better come soon. Alright, so this one is a little bit slower paced than the last one, kind of setting up the characters and getting to know them a little bit. But things escalate pretty quickly. I hope you enjoyed it. One thing I should mention is that me reading these chapters to you guys does not mean that this is how they're exactly going to be when I finish the book. Likely I'm going back to do a lot of editing, and sometimes I'll come up with ideas for how chapters could have been better, or I'll introduce characters and stuff like that. So this is not going to be the exact chapter probably by the time it's finished. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too boring. This chapter, I did notice, didn't have a lot of action or anything like that, just a lot of dialogue and setting up the characters. But maybe if you guys like it, I'll read the next chapter soon. Alright, thanks a lot, guys.